Reasons why we go out and we want to tile. These are the reasons why we want to rip the ground, is because we have such a tight, compacted soil, but yet at the same time, if we're able to understand the value of biologicals, the importance of these chemistries, we begin to see better porosity, better aeration. Can anybody tell me, it might be hard to see, but can anybody tell me what this image is? Just yell it out. A coal mine, you're exactly right. So this is a coal mine. One of the things that I want to leave with you today is that as a farmer, as an industry, your conversations and your mentality has got to change to be, we have to begin to mine carbon. Some of you all thought I was going to get up here and talk about high record yields. Listen, that's not easily achieved. I think the most important thing is here, how do we get to those levels? It starts with the understanding of proper biologicals, but also it starts with your soil. Just because it happens in Georgia, just because it happens in Virginia, just because it happens in Nebraska, let's talk about your ground. Let's get your soil to an ample, productive state, and this is what is taking place. This is what's required. Mining carbon. We have got to have the ability to mine carbon. Growers are doing this right now, talking about cover crops, no-till environments, minimal-till environments. The reason why those are becoming much effective in our industry is because they are putting ample amount of minerals back to the soil, but they're also putting carbon and storing carbon in the soil profile. So what is soil organic carbon? That's one of the things that we look at. That's one of the things I require on a test when we begin to go in and work with the grower. What's soil organic carbon and how much is becoming available to that crop or to that ground? The USDA or the government puts it out like this. So living matter, organic matter, we have 10%. If you look around the dead and decaying organic matter, you guys can see this. Maybe you've seen this before. But this is soil organic carbon, all right? We want to function in where we have fresh residue, living microorganisms. This is what we're after. The next slide that I hope plays is going to show from NASA. It's going to show a video of what happens every time you get into the spring and begin to work your ground. We're going to be looking at carbon emissions. So hopefully this works.
Hi, this is Bill Putman.
I want you to look at the dates.
I'm a climate scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center.
Watch the dates.
What you're looking at is a supercomputer model of carbon dioxide levels in the Earth's atmosphere. The visualization compresses 1 year of data into a few minutes. Carbon dioxide is the most important greenhouse gas affected by human activity. About half of the carbon dioxide emitted from fossil fuel combustion remains in the atmosphere, while the other half is absorbed by natural land and ocean reservoirs. In the Northern Hemisphere, we see the highest concentrations are focused around major emission sources over North America, Europe, and Asia. Notice how the gas doesn't stay in one place. The dispersion of carbon dioxide is controlled by the large-scale weather patterns
right now. We're putting a crop in the ground. Look what happens. Look at the emission factor. That's what's going on.
During spring and summer in the Northern Hemisphere, plants absorb a substantial amount of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis, thus removing some of the gas from the atmosphere. We see this change in the model as the red and purple colors start to fade.
All right, now we have more of a crop, more of a plant, more residue, more leaf, more structure of a plant. Where does that carbon go? We're cleaning the air up.
Meanwhile, in the Southern Hemisphere, we see the release of another pollutant, carbon monoxide. This is a gas that's both harmful to the environment and to humans. During the summer months, plumes of carbon monoxide stream from fires in Africa, South America, and Australia, contributing to high concentrations in the atmosphere. Notice how these emissions are also transported by winds to other parts of the world.
Don't fall asleep. You just ate lunch. Don't fall asleep.
As summer transitions to fall and plant photosynthesis decreases, carbon dioxide begins to accumulate in the atmosphere.
All right, now let's watch the Northern Hemisphere.
Although this change is expected, we're seeing higher concentrations of carbon dioxide accumulate in the atmosphere.
Look what happened. We're starting to harvest.
This is contributing to the long-term trend of rising global temperatures.
We're working the ground, getting it ready, putting our beds up. Look what's happening.
The Orbiting Carbon Observatory 2, or OCO2, will be the first NASA satellite mission to provide a global view of carbon dioxide. OCO2 observations and atmospheric models like GEOS 5 will work closely together to better understand both human emissions and natural fluxes of carbon dioxide. This will help guide climate models toward more reliable predictions of future conditions across the globe.
So you say that's a pretty cool video. Now tell me what it means. What it means is the fact that in an industry where the industry's asking you to produce, what's happening is in the soil, we're releasing energy. We're releasing food, much needed food for microbial populations. Anybody, by show of hands, ever heard of C4 and C3 plants? All right, several in the room. C4, C3 plants, if you're not familiar, C4 plants, they're very efficient in using carbon. C3 plants are not. It's something very important that you as a farmer need to understand. C4 plants are grasses. That would be wheat, that would be corn. C3 plants are legumes, such as it's going to be soybeans, alfalfa. You say, why do I need to know about C4 and C3 plants? It's because the interaction of microbials match to the species of a C4 or C3 plant. The number one killer of fungi populations is soil disturbance. Why do in the winter, when we drive down the road and we see pine trees, why are they so green and there's 2 foot of snow on the ground? It's because these are carnivorous trees. They are a C4 plant that has been able to store and hold carbon way farther than what you could ever dig up, way farther than what you could ever see. You go to the National Redwood Forest, 1 acre of fungi population can expand over 600 million tons of fungi. Guess what that is holding? Is carbon. Do you think anybody is going out and fertilizing a red oak? No, it's not happening. It's because deep below the soil, the fungi has been tied to this species. It has now stored carbon and it's releasing, it's becoming beneficial. Just about 5 months ago, I saw an article. It's happening in San Francisco. It's happening in California. The traffic, the infrastructure, what's happening is the cities, some of these cities are starting to build flower beds along the sides of the road. And because the emissions that are coming out from the vehicles, they're putting the flower beds along the roads, and it's making their cities beautiful. They're getting grants, they're getting loans, they're getting all these accolades for having a nice city, a nice, beautiful town, and all of the generated emissions from the cars are feeding all these flower beds, and some of the flower beds are going above the highways. It's carbon. So C4 and C3 plants. So what that means is that C4 being grasses, we have to understand that if I'm going to purchase a biological, you need to tell me, is this fungi dominant or is this bacteria dominant? Because where I'm going to place this, I'm going to place this into a grass or a corn environment. If it's not fungi dominant, then I need to put that into a soybean environment. Why do some products work and some products don't? Is because, again, what I just said, they're mismanaged. They're hoping that your soils have become so malnourished that they integrate a product that is becoming beneficial, and some of you all can raise your hand and say, this is the greatest product I've ever used. Well, I would dare to say that your soils are so deprived in what food and what microbes are there that if you were to begin to understand where your soil needs to go, you would start to lose some of these dependencies upon these quick microwave type products. So when we talk about, I'm not really going to give much of a sales pitch, but one of the things that I focus on a lot is your crops have a sweet tooth, okay? And one of the products that we address this with, and looking at carbon and looking at sugars and looking at energy, is a product that we have called Biovante. It's the right to excite. It's a generated sugar product, has sucrose, glucose, fructose, and maltose, along with 2 strains of bacteria that aid in carbohydrate production. So here's the breakup, and you say, listen, man, I've done sugar before, I've done molasses, I've done my own type of sugars. Not all sugars are created equal. We're not talking about apples here, we're talking about apples and oranges. a crop carbohydrate diet. What I'm getting ready to show you, some information I'm getting ready to show you, generated from researchers at the University of Kentucky. They were extension agents, and I think it was 14 or 15. I have the article, and you can see it. They wanted to figure out, per 1 bushel of corn, per 1 bushel of soybeans, how much pounds of glucose would it require for me to raise a bushel of corn or a bushel of soybeans? Had nothing to do with water. They did both irrigated and dry land plots, merged the data together. It had nothing to do with nitrogen, nothing to do with phosphorus, nothing to do with potassium. The only thing that they were focusing on was how much pounds of glucose did it take me to raise 1 bushel of corn or 1 bushel of soybeans. So looking at this, 1 ounce of glucose, a kilocal, or calories, has 110 calories, okay? You say, oh man, I didn't know I was gonna get all this numbering, but it's important to know this. From their data, they found that 78 pounds of glucose was required to raise a bushel of corn, and 119 pounds of glucose was needed to raise a bushel of soybeans. Now, whenever you sit down and begin to talk with your agronomists, your consultants, I dare to say nobody's ever having this conversation. Nobody is asking themselves, well, how many pounds of sugar do I need to actually raise a productive crop? How many pounds of sugar am I going to need to get to 300, to 400, to 500, get to 100 bushel beans? When we look at this, the value and the importance of energy far supersedes whether you had a good sunlight year or you had a bad sunlight year. Let's look at the numbers. 1 bushel, so if you carry this through, that would mean that 1 bushel of corn would need 137,280 calories, a bushel of beans, 209,440 calories. Your crops definitely demand a lot of energy. Let's look at a 200 bushel crop of corn. Look how many, 27 million calories. Soybeans, 60 bushel crop, 12.5 million calories. 1 ounce of our material, because of how we have broken this down and how we've structured the product, with the sugars, it has the ability to generate 1 ounce up to 1.5 million calories. We can do a lot with just ounces that many try to do with gallons. So let's look and you say, well, I'm going to use table sugar, okay? Some of you all, I'm not going to ask for show of hands, you might have been or are currently putting out 3, 4, 5 pounds of table sugar. Guess how many pounds of calories? That's 1,760 calories. Guess what? You're not even scratching the surface when you put out 5 pounds of sugar. You're not even coming close. You're requiring or asking the plant to produce all it needs. So let's look at the numbers. When we follow that through, look how many pounds of sugar you would need. Now we're just talking about just an outside energy source. We're not talking about what would actually come from the soil profile, okay? Annually, it's on average, your soil can release 5% of carbon annually from your organic matter. All right, so we're talking about a small percentage coming from the soil. We're talking about a small percentage or a large percentage that is needed for the crop. And if you're putting out sugar, again, that's probably why you have been ineffective or you've seen volatility when you have put out 3 or 4 or 5 pounds of sugar, is because you're not really scratching or helping the plant at all. So you just give up and say that sugar talk's just it's just a wash. So let's talk about molasses. Some guys have used molasses. Look at 400, look at 100 bushel soybean crop. Look at the demands. All right, same scenario. All right, that's how much you would need. 400 bushel crop. It's not effective. I mean, let's get real. You can't actually put this into play on your farm. It's not going to become effective. So are you throwing your money away with 3 pounds? Are you throwing your money away with 5 pounds? It's about becoming effective, becoming efficient. So when we break this down, I'm just going to give some numbers and then I'll move on. But this is kind of how it breaks down with our product. 18 ounces based off of the calories, that same 15,006, and so on and so forth. So we can be economical with energy, with content that's going to be beneficial for the soil. You use this product in your pre-emerge burn down, you use it in the row, you use it across the top of the plant in your herbicide and your fungicide. We can be effective. And again, there's no way we'd be effective with that many pounds of sugar or that many gallons of molasses. I'm just going to breeze through these numbers here. You guys can see us at the booth. This is put on with an aerial applicator at fungicide, 6 ounces, 2.3. Now you may not say much at 2.3, but when you're only investing, $1.78 and you're getting 850 bushel beans, that's still profit at the end of the day. All right, so let's talk about yield. Going back to yield, how do we connect these dots? How do we put everything together? Here's the interesting thing. Your crop needs, 96% of what your crop needs, you don't even get to really touch unless you're irrigated. Hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen. There's 4%, so 2.7% of that 4 is macronutrients and 1.3 of that are micronutrients. Now, if anybody was to walk out of these doors and go to a horse race or gamble, I would dare to say you're going to be going with the 96% odds. So why are we not betting more on hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen? Why are we asking our fertilizer companies, why are we demanding that our seed companies do more? Look, this ball's in your court. It's not in theirs. How do we improve H2O in our soils? How do we hold that? How do we ask our soils to hold more carbon? We have to look at biological interaction and the importance of that and what products we're going to use to get us there. I met a guy back in 2006, 2004, and for me, it was a setting like this, and I sat there, and he was a microbiologist. He's retiring. This was his last presentation he was ever going to give. I was in Albert Lea, Minnesota. I was sitting in the room. Many of the guys, just like this, he was presenting after lunch. They fell asleep. This guy is so old, he's standing there up there with the overhead projector. You guys remember the overhead projectors? He's up there, and he's got a book about 8 inches thick, and he's going one by one. I mean, half of the room, 70% of the room is falling asleep on this guy, and he is so monotone, and he's just talking, and the microbial populations are this, and I mean, everybody's asleep, and I'm sitting there, and I can't write fast enough. After the presentation's over, I go up to him, and I say, I introduce myself, and I say, I would like to get your overhead projection slides, and I would like to see if I could scan them and use it because I'm coming into the industry. I'm doing more with biologicals, microorganisms. And he said, son. He said, you're not going to get my book. He said, but here's one thing that I can tell you. He said, you need to go back home and you need to tell everybody that you come in contact with that they need to create a mailman syndrome. I thought, this old dude is sick and twisted. I don't even know what a mailman syndrome is. And he said, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to go home. This was March the 31st, he gave this presentation. He said, I want you to go home and I want you to watch your mailbox. I was like, listen, dude, I'm all about your notes here and you're telling me to watch a mailbox? So I go home, I get home April the 1st. He said, when are you going home? I said, I'm going home tomorrow. I get home April the 1st. Well, what's April 1st, right? April Fools, right? So I get home, I pull into my drive, I open up my door, I turn around and look at my mailbox. And I'm thinking, this old guy he's a jokester. He's a comedian. He's got me here watching my mailbox. So April comes, May comes, June comes, July comes, and August, I look back out of my mailbox out the window, and it hits me. I figured it out. It just so happened that summer we had one of the driest summers. Again, I don't have irrigation for my yard. I lived in the country. What God gave us, what Mother Nature gave us, fed the grass. I didn't fertilize. I look out to my mailbox, and around my mailbox, all I needed that summer to mow was a weed eater. Why did I need a weed eater? Look what happens. Now, the USPS, these things here are not even produced anymore, these cars. They are the worst at carbon emissions in the world. Look what happened. What was coming out of that exhaust? The mailman would pull up, he would stop, put my mail in my mailbox, drive off, right? Every time he stopped, he was stopping by my mailbox, and my mailbox grass would continue to grow. What did I just say a while ago? C4, C3 plants. C4 plants are more efficient about storing or holding carbon. You know why? Because they are fungi-dominant species. C3 plants are bacteria-dominant species. They don't, or they're not able to use carbon as efficiently. Those numbers alone prove what the guys in the University of Kentucky did with those numbers I just showed you. 78 pounds of glucose, 119 pounds for soybeans. It proves exactly the importance of why you, as a farmer, need to be understanding where and how do I use products and why am I not feeding my soil. So he said, create this mailman syndrome. So that's what we've been trying to do as a company. Anybody in here ever use the Sovita test? Nobody in this room Okay, we got a, right here. Okay, John back here. Anybody else over here? Anybody ever heard of the Sovita test? A couple have you, okay? Sovita test is a method to be able to test soil respiration. It's how healthy your soil is actually breathing. And it's done through microbial interaction in your soil. I talked to this doctor, Dr. Will Britton. Dr. Will Britton, he and I had conversations, shared emails back and forth. His data, mine's a little bit different from what his is. He's more conservative with his data. But here's his data. In a 30-inch row environment, he says that per day per acre, a corn plant needs 400 and 420 pounds of carbon per day per acre, soybeans and wheat and so on and so forth. Now you think about this per day per acre. We're talking about water. How much water? A quarter of an inch, half an inch of water do I need? We never had this conversation. But this conversation right here needs to start to be had, and this is why cover crop guys are starting to see break off in yields. This is why their production is starting to improve, is because these numbers are becoming more predominant in their systems instead of a guy that's a non-conventional or not doing cover crops or he's a tillage. This is exactly why, because we have more carbon available to feed the microorganisms. We talk about the importance of energy and photosynthesis. What are the byproducts of photosynthesis? We know them as oxygen, fats, proteins, and sugar in the form of glucose. Now there's many things that can influence these byproducts: weather, light, water. But we know that we have to have photosynthesis. When we look at photosynthesis, we want the best way to intercept as much sunlight as possible. Here's a very interesting thing. We, at the end of the year, will gauge our success not just off of yield production and say, well, this year I did 280 in corn, I did 85 in beans. Well, guess what? You get to the coffee shop and it was a good sunlight year. We had a great year. It was good. We had a lot of sun. Here's the misrepresentation about sunlight. Sun can only provide, through photosynthesis with energy, sun can only provide your plants 5 to 21% of the energy needs of that crop. That's a stark thing when you think about it. So that means that 79 to 95% of energy has nothing to do with NPK, has nothing to do with zinc. 95 to 79% of the energy has to come from your soil, or it has to come through supplemental applications. So were you successful with that pass with your herbicide? You guys remember this movie? What was it? If you can't tell, I kind of like interaction, so you remember what they said? What was the phrase? What was the one phrase? If you build it, they will come. That's the exact scenario that you guys have to go home and think. If I build this thing, they're going to come. What's going to come? Food's going to come. Minerals are going to come. Micronutrients are going to come. The ability to hold water is going to come. This is your ground. Why is your ground profitable? Why do people put a numerical dollar amount on how good that ground is? Well, I just have bad ground. It's $2,500. Well, this ground over here, they're really good. They pay $10,000. Why? Why is it like that? Why are you not trying to take your $2,500 piece of land and make it that $10,000, that $15,000, to where it's something that nobody can touch? It's too valuable. These things are in your hand. The ball is in your court, and you have the ability to do that. And when we look at fungi, we've all seen this picture, many people, the mycorrhizal fungi. Don't be misconstrued. Fungi is not a root. It's not a root. Everybody wants to say fungi is a root. Fungi is an extension of your root, okay? Mycorrhizal fungi is an extension of your root. Again, when we look at corn, fungi is dominant in corn. We look at soybeans. Bacteria is dominant in soybeans, and I'm primarily talking about those two because I'm sure a lot of people in this room grow those two. But we have to understand the relationship with those between the species of what we're growing. And I'm going to move through this quick. Again, in the brochure, it kind of talks about this. What are root exudates? Many guys, whenever I ask the question on our winter workshops, do you know what root exudates are? Many of them in the room, they never raise their hand. Well, I'm going to give you a crash course just real quick. So if you look at this picture, light comes in, oxygen's given off, carbon dioxide comes in, we need water, minerals come in, sugar is giving off. So let's look at this. Where the sugar comes off, we know as the rhizosphere. The rhizosphere is 1/110th of an inch, right around that root tip. Look what's happening around the rhizosphere. All of the micronutrients, everything that you want to get into the plant is coming in through that root in the rhizosphere. Guess what happens? In order for those micronutrients, anybody in this room ever have a frustration? You have been at it for years. You have been fertilizing for years. You pull tissue samples, and when you pull a tissue sample, the numbers from what you think they should be aren't even there. I'm sure there's a lot of frustration in the room. You have been fertilizing. There was a gentleman that stopped by yesterday. 4 years he's been at this program. He might even be in the room. I'm not going to ask him to raise his hand. 4 years he's been at a program of fertility, looking at fertilizer. He was given this pitch. In 4 years, we're going to be able to change these numbers, change everything in your soil, and your soil is going to be much better off through this fertilization program. Guess what happened at the end of year 4? It looked exactly like the same as the starting of year 1. That happens everywhere. That happens to so many guys. Why does that not change? Everything is in the soil profile. Anybody that has high CEC soil in here should be focusing on how do we get these micros into the plant, how we do it more efficiently. That happens in 1/110th of an inch around your root. In order for those micronutrients to get into the plant has to give off. This is like a drug transaction. This is an exchange that takes place. Sugar comes down the plant, releases off of the plant, nutrients come in. That's how it's happened. You're trying to shove a square into a circle hole. It doesn't work that way. You have to understand that in order for those nutrients of what you see on your soil report from whatever lab that was taken from, and it says a high CEC content, and you look at this and say, man, I have good ground, I have good soil, but how come it's not showing up on my tissue samples? Right there, it's this interaction. You've got to create this exchange. The plant has to give sugar off. Once it gives sugar off, then these nutrients come into play. Now we have a vascular system that can pull these things up to the plant, the newest parts of the plant. Look at this microscopic picture of phosphorus. This is phosphorus fixation. This is exactly what it looks like on the root hairs or the root tips of your plants. We're fixing P right here. We're holding P. This is done through microbial biological interactions. So root exudates. Root exudates, here's basically what happens. Sugars. If you look at the umbrella, antibiotics, vitamins. All right, then you look at the metabolic and then the physical chemical effects. You can keep on moving down and see where CECs are important. Osmotic potential, ionic balance, redox potential, the nutrients. Look on the metabolic effects. You want your plant to be metabolizing. You want a fast metabolism. The iron cowboy, can you imagine 12,000 calories a day? His body is such a high rate of metabolic rate that the food that he consumed was much needed energy, but he burned through that very quick. Your plants have to do the exact same thing. You want 300 bushel corn, you want 150 bushel soybeans, you have got to create an environment to where your plants have a high metabolic rate. And they do this through the interaction of biologicals. So when we look at this, the far plant to the left is without any type of biological interaction. The plant in the middle is a seed treatment, not mine, as a competitor to myself. And then the third plant is our program, which is a seed treatment in furrow and foliar applications. Now, pictures speak a lot, okay? And it's important to know that throughout the year, this cannot just be a one application approach. If I'm only putting something on the seed, and I'm believing that that's going to carry me through the year. Listen, most seed treatments at best have a life expectancy of 37 to 41 days. In-furrow applications, you think that that's going to last you all season long. In-furrow applications are great. They're great for starting and getting out of the ground, cool, wet temperatures. But that's not going to be sustainable throughout the whole year. You have to continually supply energy. Now that you have the house, you have to continue to fuel that house with energy throughout the year. The herbicide applications, the nitrogen applications, the fungicide applications, that's where like a product like Biovante, you have to have energy going throughout the whole year to feed this interaction. The picture that I'm getting ready to show you, we've done 3 years worth of work and we've built up, this last year was the largest that we've seen, but I want to show you something. This plant right here is one plant, one soybean plant, 1,444 pods. You say, that's pretty cool. I've seen some big stuff at the end of my row. I'm not really impressed. We started 3 years ago with like this. We started spacing soybean seeds out, 758 pods. 2017, we got it up to 1,137. Last year, we got it up to 1,444. We had 4 plants that were spaced out 9 to 10 inches. If you carry that through per acre, that's going to roughly be about 21,000 finished population that you would have in that field. Nobody in this room, I would dare to say, would raise their hand and say, hey, 21,000 is the way to go. That's not going to happen, right? But however, seeing the potential of knowing that, hey, I'm planting at maybe 120,000, maybe 180,000. What we have found as a company by creating competition in the soil or in that environment, and we're looking at seed spacing, but anytime we create competition and we have neighboring plants, sometimes soybeans stick together. What do we look at? We all talked about 5-6 years ago, corn seed spacing. David Hula, Randy Dowdy, they all got up and started talking about, well, you need good proper seed spacing. Why are we not doing the exact same thing with soybeans? Why are we not doing it? We have found as a company that whenever we look at precision of spacing out soybeans, we allow that plant now, something that we've never heard before, we now allow a soybean plant to flex. We talk about flex hybrids on corn, fixed hybrids on corn. We never talk about flex hybrids on soybeans. There's genetic expressions that are not getting to come out in the genetics that companies are putting out simply because we've crowded the environment. And everybody in this room, I would dare to say, if it's not even on your own farm, it's on a neighboring farm, everybody could raise their hand and say, I have dealt with too tall of soybeans. Do I dare say that? Everybody's dealt with tall soybeans. It grows, it gets too tall, and it falls down. That's a problem. We space these things out. We put together a program, and we look at the applications. This plant, whenever we harvested, we did this by hand, obviously, but whenever we looked at this plant was 1.5 feet shorter than the neighboring plant, which was planted at 93,000 population. I would dare to say some of you all in here would never drop below 100, but it happens. I have a grower here with me, Jimmy Frederick from Nebraska. Last year on an irrigated, he went 163. This year on a dryland plot, he hit 138 bushels on a dryland soybean plot with a final stand of 47,750 seeds. We had roughly 5 acres at 50 to 60,000 planted. We had 5 acres at roughly 70 to 80,000 populated planted. And then the rest of the field, which is 194 acres, was planted at 110 to 120. Here's the interesting thing. The 110 to 120 averaged right about 85 bushels, or 89 bushels, sorry. No, 85 bushels for the 110 to 120. The 70 to 80 average about 89 bushels, and the 50 to 60 average at 125. Now, whenever we're looking at, Kevin talked about it yesterday, about what are your break-evens? You're not cheap at 340 break-even. So what are you going to do? You're going to avert to fertilizer. Well, I'm just going to start cutting back in fertilizer because that's my most expensive cost. It comes down to an efficiency factor. It comes down to numbers. This is a numbers game. Most plants, most soybean plants are going to average 14, 15 nodes. What we're doing, what we're seeing in these environments, we're getting proper seed spacing. We're putting in proper products throughout the year. We're averaging 21 to 24 nodes per plant. All right, we're dropping population. We're allowing the plant to expand, and we're moving forward. The one thing that I wanted to hit on, and it was a part of the conversation yesterday, differentiating yourself and knowing that the product that you produce is of higher quality. Quality, quality, quality. That's where the buyer is going to demand upon you how good you are at what you do. One thing that we're noticing with our programs, we have higher lysine and higher crude protein values. You know what happens with international buyers? The reason why they want to buy U.S. commodity goods is because you do such a great job at high protein-based products, starches. Everywhere that we put these chemistries and we begin to test side by side, we lower the population, we increase the overall applications of biologicals, sugars throughout the year, we have higher lysine levels and higher crude protein levels. That makes it more attractive. Once you all begin to find a market and position yourself, that makes you attractive to where you can start demanding premiums because you're producing something that's better than your neighbor. You're producing something that is of much greater value from a nutritional standpoint than your neighbor. When we talk about decommoditization, you've got to find a way to differentiate yourself to be successful. Your innovation is not setting so much in a room. Your innovation is setting on your own farm. What are you going to do for the 1,000 acres that you have? What are you going to do for the 15,000 acres that you have? Where's the innovation? Are you waiting upon a company like myself? Are you waiting upon seed companies? Are you waiting upon the next greatest technology company? Listen, your innovation are some simple things. Dropping population. What that's going to cost you? $6, $8, $12? Changing up some fertilizer. If it was as easy as fertilizer, everybody in this room could raise 500 bushel corn. It's not. It's about mining carbon. It's about putting in proper biologicals. It's about a consistent program throughout the year. We're here to help you. That's what we're trying to do. We are doing now in-house in our own lab. We're getting farmers' soil samples. We're looking at where your levels are, where your energy is setting at. How can we infuse? How can we put in more energy into your soil? Are you fungi deficient? Are you bacteria deficient? And we begin to come out and we begin to put products in with you. We don't just say, hey, here's one product. This covers everything that you need. That's a foolish statement. I'm sorry. That's a foolish statement to believe that one product's going to improve your whole soil conditions. There's far more parameters that are involved than just one product being the go-to. So, again, I challenge you with the mentality of mine carbon, mine carbon, mine carbon. Follow us on our Twitter and our Facebook. Winter workshops, we'll be having lists to sign up. We'll be out in our booth. We are handing these out as supplies last. These are basic seed treatment chemistry kits that you can go home. We have our seed treatment in here. You put it on the seed. You kind of do your own little Petri dish tests. You guys can take these home for free. Be sure to stop by. You can see how well this works. Again, I thank you guys for your time. Feel free to stop by the booth. Thank you very much.